Hello, and welcome to Women Talking About AI. In this episode, Jessica and I talk with Dr. Tamara Tate, Associate Director of the Digital Learning Lab at UC Irvine. Tamara left a long career in corporate law to focus on how students learn, and now she leads research on AI in education. She's the principal investigator on an NSF grant studying how students engage with AI in their writing, and a co-creator of Papyrus AI, an intelligent writing coach used in both middle school and college classrooms. In this episode, we discuss AI literacy, student voice, and how writing pedagogy is evolving. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women Talking About AI. Kimberly and I are excited to be joined today by Dr. Tamara Tate. She's an Associate Director of Digital Learning Lab at UC Irvine. She's leading some of the most innovative research on generative AI in education. She has a fascinating background. She started out practicing law and then earned her PhD in education. And she's a principal investigator of an NSF grant exploring how students can effectively use AI in their writing. She's the driving force behind Papyrus AI, which is an intelligent writing coach reshaping how we think about AI-assisted learning. Welcome to the show, Tamara.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I was just learning about Papyrus AI today. I had not heard of it before, and it's very similar to what we were doing at Moxie. I really appreciated your focus on the Socratic method. So we definitely want to learn more about that journey. But before we dive right into that, I'd love to hear more about how did you go from law to education? That's a big jump.
Yeah. I've been lucky to have two careers. Honestly, I had a wonderful 17 years as a corporate finance partner, worked with a lot of technology companies and healthcare companies. And it was a lot of fun and I learned a lot and I met a lot of interesting people. But I had jokingly always said that once I got bored, I'd be leaving. And I really didn't think it would happen, but it did. And some things happened at home and my kids were in kindergarten and third grade. And it became I think I'm going to stay home with them for a while. And then when I came back, I didn't really want to do more law because when you've done 4 public company mergers, you're like, yeah, okay, what's next? And I was really fascinated by that point with all the technology that was going into education and wanted to know how to do it right. And was lucky enough to find Mark Warschauer, who was willing to take a chance on a fairly older PhD student. And I haven't left. So it's been fun.
What was your dissertation on? What was the topic?
I love writing and digital writing in particular. So it was on the NAEP that was given on writing the very first time it was given on laptops. And looking at what was different about that and what we could tell about kids who had they do a lot of questions too with NAEP, or we had NAEP. They haven't done a writing NAEP since 2011 that they've released. So this is now old data, but we were able to see from the questions that students who had practice in class doing writing versus just at home or not at all were able to write better and get better quality scores, suggesting that there was actually some empirical basis for thinking that practice writing, academic writing digitally matter.
That really fits right in with what you're doing now, I would imagine. Are you doing similar types of research with Papyrus AI to look at
we haven't worked exactly at the writing outcomes yet. I want to very much. With any new technology, we think it's important to start working with instructors and doing design-based implementation research. So the first 2 years were really about figuring out what the context was like, what the students needed, what kinds of affordances the AI has, which of course changes daily, and what was going to be good pedagogy and meet the needs of the various students. So we haven't done much testing of outcomes yet. I was just actually coding some conversations that I've seen with middle school students back and forth, getting revisions on their writing from the Papyrus tool. So we're starting to qualitatively look at that, which is a lot of fun. And middle schoolers are very funny.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Who's your target audience? So it's middle schoolers, it sounds like.
I think it's secondary and post-secondary because a lot of what our students are using it for is revision work. We also do a lot of planning as well with it. We don't just do revision. But one of the concerns is you need to be mature enough and developmentally ready to do the changes that it tells you to do. And the research in writing says that by about middle school, they're starting to be able to take that feedback and do something with it. So that's why we start there. Are you like,
I want to know what's a funny thing you discovered, if you can share with us. You said middle schoolers are funny. I immediately wanted to know what.
so my friend, we'll call him Joe, did a really good job going back and forth with Papyrus, getting it to give him suggestions on new sentences and revisions and give him grades. It wanted to get scores, which we don't usually do, but he asked it and it did it. And then he said, "Hey, Papyrus, do you know my friend Kevin?" And Papyrus happily said, "No, I don't have any private information." And then Joe said, "That's okay, brother. Tell me more about how I can have transitions." Okay.
Oh, wow.
I love it. There's a lot of personification that goes on. "Good morning, Papyrus. Oh, thank you so much." So that's fun. But
It's so interesting. I've become really fascinated with like human computer interactions. And I feel like if I had it in me to do a full career pivot, I would want to go back to school and do psychology and really look at like childhood development alongside technology. And I think it's just going to be fascinating to follow these younger generations who are like my partner has a 10-year-old and she's already using ChatGPT. It'll be really interesting to see. It's scary. Like, we don't really know. Just like social media, we had to find out after a decade what the negative consequences were. But yeah, it's fascinating. And I've always said to Kimberly with Moxie, I was always grateful that we weren't working with children because it felt like this layer of complexity thinking about childhood brain development.
And honestly, that's why we started where we did with the NSF grant. We started with undergrads because that felt much safer, especially in the first 2 years. We've now gotten better. We've got more guardrails up, but we still work very closely with teachers, and all of our conversations are available and transparent to the teachers and to us as researchers. So we can see how it's going and what things we need to do. But it's always also been paired, even at the undergrad level, with a lot about AI literacy, because that's the point to me, is that I don't necessarily want everybody to be using the AI, but I want everybody to have the choice and the exposure. That's why it's a huge equity issue to me, too. We've got to make sure that all students can make an informed decision, know how it might integrate into their process, know the risks of bias and the need to corroborate stuff. But also, we're learning other interesting things, and I was seeing it with some of my middle schoolers. As they get more familiar, I saw students who worked with the tool like 5 or 6 times. They had learned to go back and ask the tool to, "No, can you do that shorter for me?" Or, "No, my teacher doesn't like it like that. Do it like this." And one of the things we even had to tell our undergrads at first is, don't just do a transactional one and done. The real magic, frankly, of the AI is the ability to be dialogic. And we really want to say, look, you're the author. You're the human in charge of all that. Make sure we tell them they're to be the boss. And the kids like that kind of get like, you're the boss. And with the undergrads, we really make sure we say, you're the author. You're responsible for what you turn in, regardless of how it got there. Corroborate it, get what you need, make sure you're happy with what you've gotten. And I was really pleased to see this last spring pilot that we had. We're seeing a decent amount of that in the students. And so the curriculum and the teachers are learning to remind them, hey, you can ask Papyrus to shorten that, or you can push it if you don't like what it said.
Oh, man, if I had a nickel for every time I've said, don't take the first output, iterate, I'd be doing good.
Yeah, we'd have at least $10.
I'd have at least $10.
Yes, at least.
At least. I might have 100. I might have 100.
Yeah.
That's what's interesting. Like, we work with doctoral students, but everything you're describing, these are the same conversations we have because the technology is new to everyone.
Exactly. That's why it's important to get out right now really broadly with these literacy pieces, at least, because one of our engineering students are actually usually in their senior year. And often they don't take the class until right now. Okay, in July, when you started an engineering company, you need to know what this can do and can't do so that you're competitive, so that you're safe. I don't want you building bridges without double checking your sources. Yeah, it's the same right now.
Yeah. I just want to reiterate what we're talking about for anybody who's listening, who's new to generative AI. What Tamara was saying is that you never want to accept the very first thing. You always want to read it really carefully and look at, okay, what do I want to confirm about that, or what do I want to correct? And then iteratively interact, or her word was like dialogue with the tool, because that's the difference in this technology and all the other ones before. Like before, you just it's a one and done thing. If you don't get what you want, you're like, oh, it's screwed up. Maybe I'll restart my spreadsheet. This formula is not working. And that's not the case with this technology. This technology needs confirmation or correction every single time.
But it's been interesting because that's the back end. We're also finding the front end piece. We're learning that thinking first is really important because you can do a better prompt if you thought about what you want, if you thought about your audience, but also because there are all these psychological things that once you start going down a lane, people tend to stay in that lane.
Yes.
It's like when you're going to go buy a Kia, always Kias. It's that kind of stuff. Also, we know that the language coming out of most of the generative AI is very fluent. It doesn't have hedgy language. So it seems very authoritative. And we've seen studies coming out just in the last few weeks showing it's more persuasive than most people. So these are things to be aware of. And we've been really pushing. If you're not, of course, if you're doing something simple, what should I make for dinner? Right? There are all kinds of things that you don't really care about, or it's a low grade administrative task that you don't care about. Fine. But if it's something you care about, that you value, you really need to do your own thinking, brainstorming first, and then check it for some additional things that you might have missed. Or you're going to ask a better prompt and it's going to give you more exactly what you're looking for. So that was one of the first things that we saw in our first year of the pilot was, we really need to make sure there are a lot of people talking about using it for brainstorming. And we have a little bit of a caveat on that. It depends.
Yeah, it's like it depends on how advanced the learner is. We talk about that when we're dealing with students versus faculty. We're like, okay, if you're a faculty member, you're an expert. You're going to interact with it differently because you have expertise. Whereas if you're a student and you don't know if what you're inputting is correct, if the output is correct, then yeah, you have to handle it much differently. Yeah, I feel like you're in our brain. So much of what you're saying just goes right
Although
along.
the thing for the faculty is something I learned in law. You go from a stage as an associate where you're writing the whole agreement. And so you know the ins and the outs and so you know where it can go wrong and whatnot. When you finally raise to the level where you're supervising people, you have to learn a slightly different skill about how to look at somebody else's work and spot the flaws in logic, in consistency, whatever. And I think that's really hard, especially for developing writers, to spot those things in writing that's not theirs and that's very fluid. So even your professors who may know it well, it's hard to learn to pick it apart. But often once you do, real issues.
I feel like you're in my head for sure right now. It's so funny. Anna Mills is how we connected. And
I've never met in person.
Me neither.
But we are social media.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have met her. We did interview her. So that was last season. She was one of our first. And she said, the things you're saying are the same things that Tamara is saying. I think you need to get her on.
Yeah, I respect her work. And
yeah, she's it was a really popular podcast, that one. But yeah, I feel like these are the things that we are constantly saying about getting feedback, because our tool is all about feedback, because doctoral students are just hungry for feedback.
And it's so time consuming. It's so hard. And the younger kids are too, because they're not really good at perspective taking.
No.
And that's one of the fun things you can do. I love having them do reverse outlining so that they can see, like we've all done a presentation, started doing the slides for something we've written. And now we can finally explain it because we've done the slides at 10,000 feet. Yes. Or we do the persona feedback where they can ask anybody they want, whether it's in my engineering class, some fancy CEO or investment banker, or if it's my middle school kids, Taylor Swift, to give them feedback on their writing in a way that maybe they can hear it differently, which is fun.
Yeah, and they don't have that. What we learned through our research was they bypass that affective state where you're embarrassed or ashamed or discouraged when your professor, teacher tells
from
you.
Kids, right?
Yeah.
They need that relationship to care.
Yes.
That's what we're seeing is it's not going to be a for sure thing, but we're seeing in some of our classes, the teachers are going, I feel like this is really good for my neurodiverse kids. They really like having the space that it's a safe place to ask questions without feeling stupid. And other kids saying, nah, I want to just go to office hours, which is awesome, wherever we can get them.
Do you think there's a level of trust? I talk about this a lot where I say, because I've noticed my doctoral students, the very first semester that I started teaching them how to use generative AI for writing feedback, there was really low trust. And I keep saying this again and again, just because the technology does something really well doesn't mean we're ready for it or that we trust it. And I always use the example of, I got an electric car a few years ago and it had autopilot on it. It was totally self-driving, but I didn't trust it at all because I had one bad experience. Like, yeah, just because the technology is there doesn't mean I trust it. And I'm curious to know what that looks like with middle schoolers, if you see it like evolve over time.
I don't see the middle schoolers minding. They're much more likely to be playful with it. But we do hear that with our undergrads. I have some we do reflections at the end of each class, each quarter. And there's always a good number of students who say, yeah, I didn't use it. I'm here to learn. If I don't want to offload my learning, which we don't either, great. I'm afraid it's going to take my voice. And those are legitimate concerns. I'm never going to argue somebody into using it. I do suggest that if you have a safe space to use it in, this might be a good time with an instructor who can tell you when and where and how so that you can decide if it does work in your writing process or not. But we see some students with very strong opinions, even beyond not trusting it. I feel like they're worried it's going to rob them of something essential. It's very interesting.
That's really interesting.
When you think about what in the media, how it has sensationalized cheating and like, I think that there should be a healthy dose of skepticism and distrust. I think that definitely influences perceptions for sure. And it needs like a reframing, and especially for students who can't afford one-on-one support. Like I work in consulting and we have a lot of people who come to us who really need feedback on their writing and they can't afford one-on-one consulting. That was one of the major reasons we started Moxie is I thought about all the people I've talked to over the years and developing countries. And hey, this creates so many opportunities for learning. It's better than not having those opportunities.
They're better than the worst available human.
Right.
At 2 a.m, when a lot of my undergrads are writing their papers, they don't necessarily have a teacher available.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that was my point to my doc students is if I'm available, I'll give it to you. But usually a lot of folks procrastinate. They're doing it at the last minute. I can't jump in at 11 o'clock on a Saturday before your paper is due. So,
and we're finding instructors having really cool ways to bring it in where rather than offloading the learning, they're really diving into the critical thinking and focusing on that in a way that's fascinating to watch. I just heard a presentation from a history professor here at UC Irvine who was frustrated because students didn't know enough history to know that when he was teaching them things, he was teaching them a surprising version of the truth, right? They didn't know the myths. He's like, how do I get... And he realized that he could use ChatGPT to tell them what the story of Paul Revere was. And then for their midterm, they had to kind of fact check it and get the real stories or whatever it was, turning it on its head, essentially, right? But also letting them pick up some cool AI literacy about what it's trained on, how it works, what you need to think about when you use it. I'm always surprised. Or another one of our professors used it to give feedback on students' elevator pitches. Oh, okay, that's cool. Because with talking, people are often really worried and nervous. Get to practice it before they do it in front of the class. Great.
oh, I used it for that all the time. We were fundraising and I was pitching. I would just take walks and I would talk. I would give my pitch to ChatGPT and I'd be like, give me feedback. It was great.
Would you tell it to be a really nasty investment banker?
Yeah. And I'd say, assume that higher ed is going to collapse because that was in the news. And I have to come up with a response to that. Yeah.
But it also made you think about your audience, which is what one of my engineering instructors does too, is like really a lot about audience awareness. And so if you can teach them to describe their audience, then get something back and they go, oh, I need to tell it to do this instead. They're engaged in a process that's doing a lot of critical thinking.
It's like role playing.
For me, teaching writing, the number one thing that helps people is when they get out of the author-centric place that we all are in, either developmentally or just
habit,
whatever. and look at their audience. We've never been able to approximate an audience response in the way we can with generative AI. We just couldn't do it. Your teacher could say, when I taught business communication, for example, I would pretend to be the president of the university or whatever they were writing. And I would say, okay, let's look at this. But that's not, they didn't take me seriously. But when you tell an AI to do it, it just gets it out of my voice and it puts it into the voice of and that's
Very
cool.
powerful.
For a writer, that turn is really hard to get organically. And I think it can happen faster, and that's nothing new. Like, this is just Aristotle rhetoric. I'm curious about a couple of things. One, I want to ask you about is it open source or proprietary wise, how does that work? And then I also want to hear you talk a little bit about what you call the walled garden approach.
It is not currently up on GitHub. We're going to be putting the code up there. We're pretty open source shop, but we haven't really been able to do that yet. But like all of our prompts, all of our instructional resources are all up on our Gen AI AD space. So we're always pointing people, like, if you want a curriculum lesson on this or that, or some basic foundational stuff, that's all completely open source, ready CC BY licenses for anybody to use.
And how does the university is the university claiming?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Yeah. That's
It's owned by the regents of UC, of University of California. The three of us here who developed it have a small co-ownership piece. We did get a small grant to look into commercializing it. I left law to avoid being in a tech company. I'm the voice of no, please no. I love the research side of it and having the data that I spent all morning going over and seeing those conversations and seeing the writing change is just gold to me. But yes, it could be commercialized someday. It is not currently on the plan for that.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Or in the walled garden, we are doing it through an API without letting the data go up to train the open. We're using OpenAI right now, GPT 4.0. We're modular so we can change our LLM at any time. And we have done that 3 or 4 times so far since we made it. And we've had talks about going to Claude, but Claude is so wordy that so far we haven't made that move. So we've got, that's one of the walls that's better. We also didn't, when we first started, ChatGPT wasn't free. And we didn't want students to have that cost access. We didn't want them to have to give a phone number or an email address, especially when you get to our middle schoolers. So they get the protection of working through us as well, which is helpful. And then finally, we're using, at least for our middle schoolers, and then we can change it depending on what organization, we're using the either Amazon or OpenAI content moderation module to do a little bit of extra moderation, which sometimes becomes an issue when they're studying history in middle school and want to know about the Holocaust, but we've been able to make it work mostly.
We use different models for different types of research tasks. Like Gemini would be for more analytical work, Claude more like conversational. But most of our tools utilized GPT-4 Turbo because of longer context window.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know your experience working with a technical team. Like Kimberly and I are both non-technical, and that was consistently our greatest challenge, bridging that communication gap. Really hard.
Yeah. Luckily, that's one place where my legal expertise came in handy, because when you're taking a tech company public, you have to describe what it does so that a layman could understand it to make their investment. So I've had 17 years of learning how to listen to tech speak and try to make it English. But we're also blessed with a graduate student who has a computer science background and is magical at translating. And so I can talk to him and he'll talk to the software engineer, and it works really well. If he wasn't here, I don't think we would have built it, right? I think it would have been too much. And it's hard enough, but I can usually get the gist because of my background. And he's really good at understanding and asking me the right questions so that he doesn't know writing. So that's where we bring something to the table. And I'm like, actually, when you're doing writing pedagogy, you want to do this and this. Can we do these things? And he'll explain why we can or how we could get there. But without somebody to do that translation.
Yeah, we did not have that. And it was just really hard, especially few people have gotten a PhD or done a dissertation. And so it's like trying to help our technical team understand the types of tasks our users were working on. It's just like they had no experience with that.
we're trying to do research at the same time, and we're not a development shop. So occasionally it's very frustrating, especially for my boss, to say, I didn't want to do this. I didn't come into this to be, although sometimes he likes the idea of being a CEO, but it's tricky, right? It's a lot of time consuming decisions. What do you have to do for security clearances?
Oh, yeah.
All the things.
Yeah, our first university contract, I was navigating all of the security stuff. I was learning, learning as we're doing and just figuring it out like one step at a time.
As you're flying.
Yep.
Yes.
That is all I remember is some acronym. Heck,
That. Yes. Well, there's a lot.
Stuff.
Yeah, we learned that like the tech just isn't where we bring value. And without a technical co-founder, we just couldn't really offer the value that we felt like we could, which is we love the research. At the end of the day, we just would love to work on the research component of it.
Come and play with us.
I would
And the
really
AI
love that.
literacy. Yeah, I loved the AI literacy.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, but you can't ultimately you can't do all that. You have to attend to things on the back end.
Kimberly, unfortunately, had the job of managing our entire customer support. We're like doing this, the two of us, and like we really wanted to do the podcast and the research,
The stuff that didn't pay us.
not customer support and getting our like automation set up.
And this is what I keep explaining is if we grow too much more, we will need customer support people.
Will.
The first thing.
Yeah.
We can't have our grad student being the only technical support.
You could. I do have experience with that. We set up a chatbot and we had a back end customer service, one person, and she managed it. And yeah, so
I'll have to
hit me up when you get ready.
Kimberly would do some consulting on it.
I'll tell you what doesn't work for sure.
But you know what? That's valuable too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get for one of hats.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of hats.
What are you seeing from the parent's perspective working with younger students? We met with someone a few weeks ago for the podcast who was just talking about like working with students, and then you have teachers, and then the challenge of then they go home, and then what are their parents saying or doing with AI? And I see it with my partner who, despite I won't shut up about AI, he's not like super AI literate. And there's been times where I've seen him allow his 10-year-old to do things with ChatGPT, and I'm like, no. And then I just could imagine if our users were children and we were interacting with parents, like the added layer of teaching the parents. Do you interact with them?
And it's something that is, I feel like it's needed. We're in very small pilots right now, only in a few classes in middle school. And I feel like we really need to start looking at how to reach out to the community of parents and make sure that they're up to speed on it too, so they can guide their kids for their own sake. But no, we haven't, partly because we spent most of our time with undergrads. And so with FERPA, we don't talk to the parents at all.
Yeah.
So I think it's the next space that we really need to look at. We do have in another project doing some really cool work in some local communities, some largely Hispanic communities, working with intergenerational groups, teaching them about AI and AI literacy and teaching them to generate pictures. And there's just been some beautiful stories about grandparents explaining to the AI some scene that they're telling their grandkid about them playing soccer when they were a little girl. And it's been very emotional, apparently, to some of the, like, we've had tears, apparently, about seeing their pictures come to life and having control over that process. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done in the community as well. And
yeah, I like that you use the word community.
Back online, maybe we can do some of that.
Yeah, we've talked about going to our local library and just doing sessions. Yeah, because it's like parents are getting it. Obviously, it depends, but they're probably being exposed to it in their job in some way. And then seeing what...
That's going to be a real divide by socioeconomic status, right?
Yes, exactly. And even even with my partner, he's definitely, he's in software sales, but they have AI integrated into their software, but it's not something he has to know a lot about. And so he really doesn't have a good understanding of it. And I can only imagine, and he's college educated. So like the community I grew up in, which was a largely Hispanic community, like I was a first generation college student, mostly turkey farmers. If this were happening when I was in middle school and high school, there's no way my parents would have come home and known anything about AI. It's a very disparate experiences.
And it's changing so fast that if you're not in it, like the three of us are, like I have to check my notes every time I give a new presentation because something's probably changed. So nobody can keep up with it unless it's your business right now. So we've got to try to figure out how to translate that stuff as quickly and effectively as we can, I think.
It's moving
Yeah.
fast.
That's what I'm really interested in. Now that Moxie is closed, I really liked finding ways to explain what is a language model? What does this mean?
Right.
Because I feel often like people are saying things like, we just don't have any idea about how to talk about this or how to research this. And I'm like, have you asked a linguist? Because we do have some experience.
I hate that answer. We hear it, especially about AI, right? I mean, actually, we've dealt with tools and language since the word. You actually know some things, even about digital technology,
Yeah.
about how it's a tool and how it works with people and what are productive ways to use it. And yeah,
Yeah.
we
You
need to
know,
empower people a little bit more, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the other piece of it is that when we would provide webinars for researchers, and we would start to talk about some of these AI tools on the market for research, for
Right.
finding sources. We would have to backtrack and show okay, this is a keyword search. This is the difference between a keyword search and a semantic search. And this is how that works. And it was like digital literacy was already so low. And now
Yes.
we've just.
And information literacy. I'm working with our library, actually.
Yes, all of that. It's the perfect
Storm.
storm
Yes.
of media, even academic and traditional literacy. People are talking about a reading crisis because people aren't reading anymore. They're just giving to an AI and telling it to summarize. Yeah.
Although my kids are doing a lot of reading when they're working with the AI when they're engaged.
Yeah, you always just hear the naysayers. The media is reporting in a negative way, and it's probably because they feel threatened in some way. Anybody who's in the world of writing for a living, content generation for a living, is going to naturally feel threatened. As a writing coach, I felt threatened. Jessica owns a consulting company, and we've talked about this a lot. I think we're going to turn a corner at some point, and people will start to realize that the word generative doesn't mean it has to just generate. And part of that's that dialogue thing, that interaction that we talked about. What are you seeing people? What are their concerns about dependency on the tool, and how is that developing?
For those who are paying attention, we see a lot of grad students who English isn't their first language, and they've been using it longer than anybody. And we're starting to see some of them say, actually, I'm going to step back a little bit because I want to make sure I have my own voice. And I think that's a lot of good self-awareness. Actually, our grad student who does all the tech side of things said his coding has gotten worse because he's using the AI to help with the coding. So I think there is some of that. We've got to decide what is important to us, what matters to us. Do you want to be that facile with coding or do you not? Is that not important to you? And so those are decisions I think we need to learn to make.
Yeah, and I think it's personal and it'll evolve.
Textual, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm happy to work on my coding skills.
Right.
I can do something quick. That's awesome for me.
Yeah.
Right? His identity.
It reminds me, when we first got into this work, I read one of Ethan Mullick's first Substacks on the topic was about like the crisis of meaning. And I don't know why that has just resonated. That Substack resonated with me so much. And it philosophically, I think it's fascinating because it really does force us to, it's like an inflection point where it's what do we find valuable? What is uniquely human? How are we going to assign meaning to these different things that we do day in and day out? And yeah, it's very contextual. I just can't talk broadly about AI. It really just depends on what am I using it for? Is it low stakes? Is it high stakes?
It's interesting though, because we're seeing in this engineering writing class, for example, that they're talking a lot more about voice than they ever had. And students are having a better understanding of what that even means. And these are conversations that would have been very appropriate, but weren't happening in classes anyway. So I love that's bubbling up. The writing person, that makes me happy that kids are starting to understand that there is a writing process and that they're in charge of it, instructors are beginning to see there's not just one process. And I think that's cool to see people talking about that and valuing that. I liken it in some of my talks to it's different listening to an album of your favorite artist and hearing them in person. The album may be perfect, but there's something about the person live in person that you're never going to replicate. There's a humanness. The imperfections are what make it interesting. That's what we're trying to explain, especially to some of our second language learners, that I want to hear your voice. That's where the magic happens, not the perfect, smooth AI voice. I don't know that we've always truly valued that in writing. I don't know if that's what everyone came up through K-12 getting gold stars for. But, so I think there's a little bit of a reckoning that, hey, maybe we need to pay a little more attention to where the people are having the value.
Yeah, it requires some metacognition, like really reflecting on what is your stance? What does that mean? What does that look like in your writing? And maybe that's part of the benefit is you can offload some of these. Like we have so many tools that help with accuracy. So it's okay. It's not about speed. It's not about finishing it faster, but now you can shift your time to really analyze your voice and think about your stance instead of focusing all those on punctuation and grammar and spelling. Consistently frustrating because so much of the marketing language is around speed. And we just say, no one goes in to write a dissertation or a research manuscript as quickly as possible. That's not the point. It's really about, okay, now can I shift my time and make this higher quality than it could have been because I'm not focusing on these low-level tasks such as grammar and spelling and punctuation. And I think that's interesting. I do think my research is better. I feel like my scholarship has improved just for that reason. Like I tend to always spend a lot of time converting passive to active voice. And I don't spend time doing that anymore. I spend it on other things like strengthening my argument or thinking about counter arguments.
What's your take on, or how do you, when you're introducing Papyrus to a new group, do you address the plagiarism issue? How do you talk about it? We have been using Sarah Eaton's post-plagiarism framework. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but just the idea that like we're in a different world now, and we're going to have to redefine how we think of creativity in the work of writing. How do you talk about it?
Pretty aligned with the way you folks do. I always say you have to acknowledge it, right? You can't talk to a group of instructors with that. That's 9 times out of 10 what probably brought them to hear me talk, to deal with a tool that'll contain them in a walled garden. Can you promise it won't write for them? I'm like, no, not exactly. But I say I don't want to get into that kind of policing relationship. It's just not productive. And I also say, frankly, you're not going to win it. Yeah. So let's not escalate this because they're just going to do one more turn in one new tool. You're not going to be able to get it. So let it go. Plus, we know that there's some real discriminatory issues around it. So let's concentrate on instead on making sure that when they're writing for a real purpose, they're writing in an authentic way, they're writing as agents and authors. And let's talk about how they might use AI in a productive way that doesn't offload their learning. It's not going to be perfect, but I think it's the productive conversation to have. And there are tips and tricks if you make sure that they're writing about what happened in class or you can do it in class. But largely, it's about aligning your assessments and maybe not having quite so many assessments. It's about doing the process of writing and not so much about where you end up. Because that's so often the experience of kids, especially in K-12. They get feedback on their very final paper and they never look at that. Kids, I'd be like, you're going to write another paper for this teacher. You need to see what they cared about. Yeah, they never opened it.
My undergrad students didn't do it. They didn't care. They just wanted, where's the grade? A, B, C. Where is it? That's it.
Yeah. That's where the incentives have always been.
And so we've got to work on some of those sort of structural, systemic things too.
Which is going to take time.
As you were saying that, it just occurred to me that like just getting them to think about in what ways does this skirt the assessment process? In what ways does this reflect your actual thinking versus that of a machine? which is not really thinking, but it's that, gets them into a metacognitive kind of zone that they may not have ever been in before.
And if I can get them to write in front of me and I can say, oh, I like how you push back on this. That's why you can't do it without the teacher. You need the teacher in the classroom looking for those moments where they're doing the thinking and they're driving the AI. And maybe they haven't had that chance before.
Really interesting.
I feel like we could go on.
Yeah.
I know we're running up on time, Tamara. We typically end each episode by talking about the pit and peach of either the week or the month or the year, whatever comes to mind. I got this idea. I learned it from my partner. Like when he has dinner with his kids at night, they talk about their pit and peach of the day, the highlight and the low light day. And I guess since I asked it, I'll just jump in and give mine, which are the same right now. So we announced we just shut Moxie down, which is like the pit and the peach. The pit is obvious. It sucks. This was our baby for 2 years. Put so much effort and love and energy into it. But I've been reflecting a lot, and I've told Kimberly this. It's also the peach because it's bittersweet in a way. Like we saw this coming in January, and it was like we were doing everything to fight it. There was so much resistance of just like really trying to force it and make it work. So we finally made the decision. It was a relief. And if there's anything I've learned over all the years of therapy is like relief is a good feeling. And so once I recognized that and started leaning into it, I was able to make space for reflecting all the learning and really coming to terms with the meaning behind all of this, which I think will take time to fully process. Yeah, so that's my pit and peach. They're the same.
Yeah. My pit is that we closed Moxie. My peach is that it's the same. Yeah. I don't really, that's just so fresh. Yesterday was our final day, and yeah, it's just bittersweet.
And we went out with a bang because our servers crashed.
Sure did. Everybody was trying to download their stuff, and it totally crashed. And then they were asking, how do we save ourselves? We were like, 5 hours before we shut down, we can't help you. Like, our dev team is gone. Like, they're gone. They're out.
And we have no money to pay our dev team to fix this crash. Yeah, it was just a cherry on top of this. Kimberly texted me and she's like, I'm in Walgreens and Moxie has crashed. And I'm like, the gym and Moxie has crashed. That's it.
It's very clear that you'd made the right decision.
Yeah, I was like, it felt like a Seinfeld episode or something. Can't make this up.
But it's real funny to them. And I know what we mean to, it's just at that point, there was nothing left to do but just laugh, because otherwise I was going to cry in Walgreens, which I'm not above crying in Walgreens.
It still wasn't going to get them what they wanted.
They weren't going to get what they wanted either way. And we've been refunding people, and if they've paid for an annual subscription, and trying to make it right in all the ways that we could. But yeah, it's really been a learning experience.
And it was a reminder of our biggest frustration, which is there's nothing we can do because we're non-technical.
Right.
We have no control. I can't jump in and diagnose anything. It's just like we're at the mercy of our technical team, who's wonderful. But yeah, it was just like another reminder of this is the right decision because we don't have a technical co-founder.
And what about you, Tamara? What's your pit and peach of the week or month? Or I know you went to Japan recently.
I did. That was very fun. I went to the Computer Human Interaction Conference for the first time, which I had never been. It's a very large conference for people working in that space. And that was really fun. So yeah, and I got to take my husband, so that made it a lot more fun. And I told him he's going to always be my conference emotional support person from here on out.
Everybody needs one.
I'm an introvert. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'll go with that for my peach. We're still living off that. The pit is working in research right now. We've lost a huge number of grants, and we're trying to figure out how to keep the lights on for those of us who are not tenured professors. And that's not fun. We've got some really cool work to do, and we're trying to figure out how to keep it going. We have really cool partners and educators we're working with. So I'm hoping we keep patching it together. But yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah, I feel you. We experienced that firsthand at Moxie. We had university contracts in the pipeline because we work with researchers. All of that was put on hold. And then we have a lot of consulting clients who lost their funding, their postdocs. It's bleak.
The ripples are huge all over.
Yeah, and I've tried to explain to people, they're like, oh, he might reverse course. I'm like, but just the uncertainty leads to paralysis. And that,
Well, and when things are broken, they can't always be fixed right away. People go start doing other things.
yeah, people need work. They need options. Yeah.
But yes, the uncertainty is really hard, especially in the corporate world like you guys were. They're not going to make purchase decisions.
No, everything is just on hold.
They're going to bring it all in and try to survive.
Yeah, they're in conservation mode, just trying to not spend money. Yeah. It's just wild.
Was there anything that you didn't get to talk about that you would like to talk about before we go?
Just welcome folks to go look at our genaied.org website, because everything we're learning, we're putting up there about what works for teachers, what works for students, and lesson plans and prompts and all those things. So happy to save somebody the time to do it themselves.
And that was genaied.org.
Yep.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks so much, Tamara.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, that
Great.
was really lovely. I feel validated that the work is still continuing through you, because it's like you were reading our minds. We have a lot in common, and so that really
I've enjoyed your work. I've been delving into it, and it's been fun. Just okay, these are good people. All right,
We exist.
good luck with your next stage.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.